Jay Shear.
Jay Shear.
Jay Shear.
Jay Shear,
business consultant.
Jay Shear.
Jay Shear Business Consulting.
Welcome. I'm Jay Shear with Jay Shear Business Consulting. We build solid foundations for service-based businesses to grow and scale and achieve the results and success they deserve. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Stephen R. Covey said, "You can't change the fruit without changing the root." Well, on today's episode, we talk about the mindsets and practices that differentiate the most impactful players, building a team where everyone is contributing at their fullest, and how you can increase your influence and multiply your impact. Here's a hint. It starts with changing you. Our guest is the CEO of the Wiseman Group, a Wall Street Journal and New York Times bestselling author, a prolific researcher, lecturer, speaker, and executive advisor who teaches leadership to executives around the world. Her list of recent clients include Apple, AT&T, Disney, Facebook, Google, and many others. In 2019, she was recognized as the top leadership thinker in the world by Thinkers 50. Please welcome Liz Wiseman. Liz, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm looking forward to this conversation where we can kind of just dig into this idea of like, how do you increase your impact?
Absolutely. As am I. And I wanted to share with you that researching you and digging into your content and just really trying to consume as much as I possibly could leading up to our talk today has been so insightful. And I love the work that you've done, and I'm really excited about digging in. So let's do that. I thought that a good starting place for us would be to have you share with us a bit about your backstory. And if you could you focus on some of the early experiences that shaped who you are today and the work that you do today?
Oh, yeah. So when you say backstory, do you mean my career backstory, or do you want to go like back to like my life backstory? Because they both have influenced what I research, how I see things.
I would say then that you answered your own question, and here's why. I've always been a believer that it's important to understand our story, the human experience piece of it, because as we show up as business owners, as leaders, it's us, right? We bring everything with us. So let's start with wherever you're comfortable starting, and then we'll move the timeline forward.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to like take you through some therapeutic, story of my life, but I guess I'll start with the recent backstory is that I am a researcher and I study management and leadership and really the workplace and how do we create workplaces where people can contribute all of their intelligence. And essentially, how do you create a workplace where people are whole-minded and wholehearted, and that they're able to really show up at work and contribute and kind of play big and make an impact and like enjoy work. So that's what I do. That's what I research. I come at my research from a 17-year career in management at Oracle. So that's, I'm a researcher who's kind of come into the academic lens of this, having been out there experiencing a lot of it myself. And I think a lot of my career I've approached in, I don't know if I would say some novel ways, but some distinct ways because of how I grew up and, of my body of work. I'm probably known for like this idea of leader as the multiplier versus the leader as the diminisher to the team. And someone once asked me like, well, how did you see that dynamic? I'm like, oh, well, this was like how I grew up. Like I'm the child of a multiplier mom and a diminisher father. And, my father was, just a little bit of a know-it-all, like kind of gruff, grumpy, kind of told everyone what to do. And, he could be fairly intimidating. And a lot of people sort of backed away from my dad because he could be tough on people. And, they maybe even saw him as a little bit mean. And I never saw him this way for some reason. And I don't know why it was. Like as a little girl, I used to look at my dad and go, oh, he's not hurtful. Like this is someone who's been hurt by life. Like I could tell, like oh no, he's not disappointed in his children. He's disappointed in himself. And like this, and for some reason, I could see that what he was doing and his behavior in our family, which was never abusive. So I don't want to tell a tale of like somehow I had an abusive father. He just had a really hard time communicating. And I could somehow see that it's not what he's trying to do. Like he's trying to be helpful. But I know it seems like he's putting you down, but he's trying to help you avoid mistakes. And like I grew up with this interpretive lens inside my own home of, well, I see what he's doing, but what is he actually trying to do? And one of the things I noticed is when I kind of stood up to him, whereas a lot of people would be like, oh, okay, whatever you say, or they would kind of walk away from it. As I was like, well, no, Dad, like, I think we should do it differently. No, I really feel like this is the right thing to do. And I know you're saying this, but I would notice he would kind of like respect that, or he would soften. And so when I went to college and I decided I did business as an undergrad, and then I kind of like gravitated towards organizational behavior and, interested in human nature and how people work. And then I get this job at Oracle where, people would often describe the environment at Oracle in early days. It was a bunch of really, really smart people, really driven. And people would say, wow, that's a tough environment. That's an environment where like people eat their young. And, some of these characters like Larry Ellison and others, like these are tough, like intimidating, know-it-all, kind of like put you in your place kinds of leaders. And I would be like, oh, they don't seem that way to me. Like, have you met my dad? Like these people seem perfectly reasonable to me. And in many ways, I felt like this environment was something I had been training my whole life for. And I found that the more that I just sort of asserted myself and stood up for my ideas and didn't wait to be invited to things and just sort of showed up in some ways uninvited, but competent and, argued my point and held my ground, that actually things just flowed easily. And a lot of these leaders that a lot of people thought were intimidating and what I called later diminishing, I'm like, oh yeah, I see the diminishing effect they're having on people, but I can also see that these are good people trying to do the right thing. Like they're not at home plotting how they're going to subordinate people and, squash people's ideas. Like they're trying to be a good leader, but they're having a damaging and diminishing effect. And I think it was just a lens that I had grown up with. And so I think a lot of my work is about how to help people arrive at work and kind of, I put it in the subtitle of the book, like to play big, to show up and be able to share their ideas and to be able to take a leadership role with confidence and not wait for permission, but, to be able to like contribute fully. And I've also spent a lot of my work trying to help leaders see that even though you think you're being helpful, you're actually minimizing someone's ability to contribute and to have an impact. And so anyway, like when you ask about my story, like my story in some ways goes back to my family and learning these kinds of coping skills, managing skills really helped me in the workplace. And a lot of my work is in some ways helping other people to do the same.
So I want to stay on a couple of things that you said for a moment. One, I want to be able to go back to the comment you made about your mother, that she was a multiplier. But I want to stay on your dad for a moment, because it's very interesting to me that as a young child, you had the perspective to be able to look at the situation that you were in and not only push back or be vocal about your stance or have a voice, but also you were able to question or ask yourself, why is he doing these things, right? So you were trying to dig deeper to understand the psychology in the mindset there. At least that's what I'm hearing you say.
It's very much the case.
And that to me that's really interesting, because I mean, I look back at my own childhood and just other people that I'm surrounded by. That takes a level of not only self-awareness, but really understanding human nature at such a young age. So I'm my question to you is, were you learning from someone else? Was your mother helping to guide you to be able to formulate those types of questions? Where was that coming from, or was it just innate?
I do think some of it was innate. Like it just came easily to me. I don't remember ever like saying, I need some strategies. Like I should like read a book, listen to a podcast and find some coping mechanisms. Part of it was, my dad's story, the backstory to his life was a little bit mysterious. So he had a falling out with his family, and it was sort of a tragic thing. And we knew enough of this as kids, like, oh, why doesn't dad talk to grandma and grandpa? Like, what happened there? And we knew enough that we understood that there was some friction there and some hurt and disappointment, but we didn't know exactly. And so I do remember kind of like, well, what happened there? And I'm like, I had to sort of piece it together. Like my cousins knew sort of the story, and, these cousins knew this. And so it was a little bit mysterious, which is probably what gave me some sense of imagination, which is like, what experiences did my dad have that caused him to feel hurt or insecure or unable to express love and concern in more positive ways? Like, why is he having to do this through these sort of veiled attempts to show concern? So maybe it was that mystery, but, for me, it helped me not only with coping, it created for me this very natural orientation to take the perspective of others, to the point where my own family hates this kind of quality in me, because, people will come to me for like sympathy, like I've been wronged by the universe, like someone did this, someone did that. And I'm usually like, oh, okay. But, they have a point. Like, and I think, I maybe have been known to like say to my kids at one point, like in their schooling, like, love, dear, if your school ever calls me with like a complaint about your behavior, I just want you to know I'm probably going to take the side of the school. Like, because it's like where some people would be like, what have you done to my child? My child did nothing wrong. And I'm like, oh no, I could probably imagine what that would have been like for the teacher. Or I'm also the daughter of a principal. My mom was a school teacher and a principal. So I told my kids, okay, if there's a call from the school, like I kind of know what that principal's thinking. And I do it like, I'm always like, yeah, but what about the other person's point of view in this? And, when I feel like I've been wronged, it takes me a minute or two, sometimes a day or two to get to the place where I'm like, okay, I'm over myself enough to go, like, what was their perspective? In what way were they disappointed? How might I have violated their expectations?
Well, that must make for some very, very interesting conversations around the dinner table, for sure. So speak then to your mother being a multiplier. Give us an example or two of what you are now able to identify in your mother as you were doing your research and really fleshing out what a multiplier is.
My mom is kind of a quintessential teacher and educator. And I always felt like she had very strong ideals, values, but she didn't force them on other people. Like growing up, I can only remember really maybe 1.5 times where my mother ever told me, you cannot do that. She would always say, well, Elizabeth, you know kind of what's the right thing to do. Like, you make the choice. Like, so she was one of these terrible parents who would put the onus for decision making on me. There were maybe one time where, she told me, like, no, I won't let you go do that. I wanted to go to a Journey concert on Sunday. And, we were a Sabbath observing family. And so she's like, I'm making that decision for you. No. And I'm like, really? I really want to go. But for the most part, it was always like listening, counseling, but keeping me responsible for my life and my choices. And she's still like this today. She's a non-Budinsky kind of mom, but also not an absentee mom, but like a very, very active mother and grandmother, but doesn't overstep.
So outside of the Journey concert decision, were there other decisions that you made where maybe she didn't step in, let's say, but at least there was some conversation after the fact to talk about the significance or the impact of the decisions that we make?
Well, there was a time where I remember going against my mother's guidance. It was soft guidance, but I very much went against it. And it landed me in small claims court at 17 years old. Ooh. And, my mom never said, like, I told you so, I warned you not to do this. She just went with me to court. But, so the small backstory to this, I won't take you through all the details, is I started sewing at a really young age. And I was kind of a little bit of a seamstress protege. I got a job at a bridal shop doing alterations and making things. And I was asked by a mother of the bride if I would make a custom dress for her. And I'm 17 years old, and I'm so flattered that she wants me to sew this dress for her. And I come home and I tell my mom about it. And I explain that, she was having trouble finding a dress because she couldn't find something that fit her size. She was very large. And my mom said, I don't think you should do that. Like, that's probably not going to end well. There's like a reason why she's probably having a hard time finding a dress. And I'm like, what do you know? Like, I'm going to help her. And it didn't go well. And, she wasn't happy with the product. And, but my mom kind of stood by me as I went and defended myself. I got sued for, wrongful sewing or something like this. And, but it was also my dad who, was kind of this more diminisher orientation. He was like, well, Elizabeth, this is your own doing. We're not gonna, you've got to figure this out by yourself. And I'm like, oh, wow, I'm 17 years old. I just got sued for like $250. It's my life savings at the time. It's all the money I had. And I'm like, okay, so I have to defend myself in court. If I lose this, I have nothing. This is like what I have to get me through, even to begin the college process. But yet, my dad, he could have said, well, he should have been a little bit more supportive. It was actually saying no, Elizabeth, you get yourself out of this situation. And I did. And it established part of this orientation of you know what? Take responsibility for things and think things through. And so you could say, oh, that was sort of diminishing, but actually, no, it was in some ways fairly wise of him to say, you figure this out.
Yeah, very, very interesting, and some important lessons to learn at a young age. And in researching you, I found where you had funded your way through college, Brigham Young. Yeah. And
you really did research, because I don't think that's in a book anywhere.
I did do some research, and I having these data points, and thank you for sharing more of the backstory here, because it really helps me, and I know it's going to help our listeners have some better context around why you went in the direction that you did, why the work that you do, certainly the early work that you did that you've continued to grow from, has been so important for you, but also so meaningful for others. So this starts to help us better understand that a bit. But where I wanted to go with with BYU is, so you were there, and you're in school for how long before you graduated? Because you also went for your master's there.
So 6 years. I did it in a nice tight 6 years, 4 years undergrad, 2 years grad, not a credit more than I needed because I was self-funding my school. And so I was like, oh, there's no time to be messing around here.
So it sounds like that you absolutely had a plan in place, at least to the point where you knew where you were going. You knew that you were going to accomplish this in a certain amount of time. We're not wasting time, right? We're staying in the course here. So at what point did you know that the work that you're doing now was something that you had to do? It was part of your calling.
Oh, I think I knew towards the end of my undergrad. So I started college thinking I was going to be a lawyer because I had so much experience in court, at 17 years old. And I think it was like, that was kind of fun. I really actually liked preparing for court and, tromping in there with my entourage of character witnesses and situational witnesses. And then I quickly figured out that, I stopped getting sued. So, I wasn't interested in law, but, gravitated towards organizational behavior. And then I did an internship working for Kerry Patterson, who, I don't know if you're familiar with his work. He's the lead author on the books, Crucial Conversations and Influence and Change Anything and Crucial Confrontations. And he was one of my professors as an undergrad. And I just was smitten with this field of organizational behavior. And I went to work for him and felt like, I really want to teach leadership. And I think it was very much Kerry's influence on me. And so I graduate from college and I'm like, I want to get a job teaching leadership. And so I also want to come back and work in the Bay Area where I'm from. And so I got in touch with a premier management training company that was headquartered in the Bay Area. And I somehow marched my way into the president's office and got an interview. And he took one look at, and I was like, I want to teach leadership, it's my calling. It's my thing. And he takes a look at my resume and I had worked in finance and, as an undergrad and had some experience working for IBM, but he looks at my resume and he goes, well, if you want to teach managers, maybe you should go get some experience managing first. And I was like, man, that's short-sighted. That's narrow-minded. He doesn't get me. Doesn't he understand this is what I'm passionate about? And I was just like, and I think I probably tried to no, but I'll learn. And he's like, go get yourself some experience managing, go get beat up in the ring. And I didn't like that at all. So I took this backup job at Oracle and turned out it was an amazing job and it would be an amazing opportunity. But I'm like, yeah, I'm only working here because I can't go do what I really want to do. And so I'm in there looking for okay, where, I take a job, I'm working there for a year and I'm like, okay, so where can I angle this career track so that I can get involved in some management training? Because that's what I want to do. And I once again tried to do that. And I was interviewing for a job in the internal training group inside of Oracle. I'd been working there for a year and they mostly did technical training, but I'm like, ooh, I can see how their charter is going to expand. The company's growing. People are being thrown into management. Maybe I'll go there and I can be the one to start up some management training. And I go and interview and I'm making my spiel about, hey, here's what I can do for Oracle, for you. I can Oracle needs a management boot camp and I'll build that. And the VP was and this changed me forever. forever. This little moment changed me. He said, and I don't think it was a big moment from him. He's just like helping this young kid try to find her way in an organization. He said, Liz, that's great. We think you're great, but that's not the problem that we have right now. Your boss has a different problem. She's got to figure out how to get 2,000 people up to speed on Oracle technology in the next year. So what would be great, Liz, is if you could help her figure out that problem. And Bob was very polite, but what I heard, and this must be that interpretive lens, like, oh yeah, like I can see what I want, but what would it, like, what's my boss's perspective on this? And he was giving me the other perspective. And I'm like, oh, well, that's not what I want to do at all. I don't want to go, I wanted to teach, but I'm like, I don't want to go teach programming. I don't have any skills for that. I don't have any interest in that. Like, I want to teach leaders. And like Bob wants me to teach nerds how to program. And I'm not a programmer. But I could hear like what Bob was essentially saying is, hey, Liz, go make yourself useful. Like, and for me, I think there's a lot of people out there trying to pursue their passion and don't realize that people don't really care about their passion. Like they care about the problem that they have. And like for me, it reoriented me like, oh, I see how to be valuable here is not be all passionate about what I want to do, but find out what others need to do and help them get that done. You know, the others being the key leaders and my stakeholders. And so I'm like, oh, okay, well, let me give that a try. And it really reoriented my thinking.
Now, did that happen almost immediately, or was there a gap in time where the conversation is had and you're ruminating on this?
I think it was fairly immediately. I took the job, and then it was okay. They're running these boot camps, and I like raise my hand and say, okay, I will sign up to be a tech trainer for that. And so there's a big learning curve I had to get up, and that's a whole story. But you know, and then the effects of that started to unfold over time. Whereas, first of all, like I learned, oh, you actually could be better at that than you thought. Like just because you don't have a formal like degree in programming, like you could learn that skill set, you can learn that mindset. Like it's learnable. So the beginnings of like a growth mindset are starting to form, which is, I mean, because Oracle is hiring not just programmers, their hiring strategy is get the top graduates out of the top CS programs in the nation. So these are the top, and they would go to the professors and say, who are your top students? And then they would systematically hire those people. So these are the people who are graduating top of their class from MIT and Caltech and Stanford and Berkeley and all these places. And so this is no small task to be doing this. And I'm like, well, yeah, I don't know how to do what they can do, but they learned it at some point in their life. So well, I suppose I could learn that now. And so I'm starting to realize that, oh, you can get good at things that you weren't good at before. And then I'm having fun doing this. And in some ways it was like this ruse where I'm like, these people don't know that I don't know what I'm doing, that I'm like just barely one step ahead of them in, you know, teaching this product knowledge. And I was just having fun. And then I realized, well, you can get passionate about other things. Like, you know, you may feel like you have a calling, but like you can work passionately about something that you're not particularly passionate about. And I'm like, that was a lot of fun. And then I'm learning, wait a minute, like as I was doing it, they're like, okay, now Liz, we need you to manage the group. And now we need you to take on this and take on that. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do those jobs. I'm having fun teaching programming. And they're like, well, actually, we need you to do those jobs. And I'm like, so once again, I give up the job. Like I'm loving to do some job that they need. And I'm learning that every time I make one of those little sacrifices and I kind of get over myself, and maybe I don't know if I should choose this word carefully, but like the word that I want to use is that I subordinate myself. Most people don't like this idea of subordinating themselves, but every time I subordinated my will, so I'm not subordinating myself like, yes, what boss, whatever you say, but I'm like, let me do not the job I want, but the job that really needs to be done. I keep getting more and more responsibility, and I'm having more influence and building up a lot of credibility and, like, technically speaking, probably power. And then pretty soon I'm getting a voice at the table of like, what's important and what should we work on? I'm like, you know what? I think we need to do something about this management training. They're like, you're right, we do. Go build this, build a team, make this happen. And I think about, man, what would my work look like if the president of Zanger Miller had given me a job teaching management training with no management experience? Or if that VP had let me sort of argue my case, like, let me go build a management curriculum, but I didn't really understand the business. I didn't understand what made the cash register ring. I didn't understand like what was at the lifeblood of the business and what managers were essentially like trying to do. I'm like, I have a very different level of influence and efficacy in my work. So blah, blah, blah. Like, that's a little bit of how I got started and why I look at
it. Yeah. Well, thank you for that, because it really, when I look back at what you were describing and the experience that you had, it happened. You earned the role that you ultimately moved into, but it happened at the right time for the right reason. Right. You can sit there and think about the what ifs had it happened earlier and what the outcome would have been, but it really doesn't matter. Right. What matters is what did happen. And it was the perfect time. You had the skill set. You built the tools that you needed. You built the relationship capital that you needed. All of those things that allowed you to accomplish the amazing things that you were able to at Oracle. So let's go ahead and fast forward a bit. You leave Oracle after 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
And did you immediately start your own business at this point?
I did. I hung up a shingle and just said, here's the kind of work I can do. And I was doing some executive coaching work. I was doing some like team-based strategy formulation, like working with executives and their management teams to help them build a strategy together. That was something I had done for Oracle. And so I just started doing that work and, had no intention of building like a company or a business, but just maybe a little team who could work on that.
So let's talk about your writing. So your first book, Multipliers, and we talked when you were talking about your family history a bit and about your mom and your dad. So just briefly define for us what a multiplier is, what a diminisher is, just so everyone is crystal clear on that. And then I would love it if we could spend just a couple of minutes talking about the unintentional diminishers and those 9 different diminisher traits and why those are important to recognize.
My goodness, you really did look at that. So one of my observations while I was at Oracle, because I want to go just back to this idea of I landed in the sea of really, really smart people. And I didn't feel like an imposter as much as I just felt so lucky to work there. And I'm watching all of these really smart people. And then I'm watching what happens when they get put into management. And I'm like, wow, sometimes really smart people make really bad leaders because they're so caught up in their own intelligence and ideas. Like they're so busy projecting out what they know that they miss what other people know. And, they don't see that they actually have a team of really smart people. Like people become underutilized around some people who are really, really smart. I ended up calling them diminishers. What I decided, actually, this observation is not just something that plays out at Oracle, it plays out in a lot of places. I saw that through my coaching work. And then I saw other leaders equally smart, equally talented, equally capable, but they use their intelligence in a very different way, that they used it more as like a platform, that like their intelligence provoked other people's intelligence, and that people around those leaders were smart and capable and energetic, and like, they're leaders you kind of lean into and lean forward to. Like when they come in a room, you're like, you start thinking more clearly and more critically, and ideas start to flow, and their leaders you're at your best around. And so I spent some time studying that, looking at what do these leaders do, what are the assumptions they tend to hold, what's the effect they have on others, which kind of in short is that these diminishing leaders in my study was that they were getting less than half of people's available intelligence.
Wow.
And it's actually a study we've replicated in virtually every continent, almost every country. We've got this data that it's like ranges between 50% and down into the 30%, versus these multiplier leaders who are getting virtually all of people's know-how and capability. I'm like, well, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that's a better way of leading if you're humble enough to not be the know-it-all of the team. And then the second big aha from the research was that most of the diminishing is accidental. And this was in some ways disturbing. Like, oh yeah, I understand how bossy, narcissistic, tyrannical, know-it-all micromanagers have a diminishing effect on others. But I could see that really well-intended people, like good people, wanting to be good leaders, trying to be good leaders, were actually having as diminishing of effect, but they didn't realize, like they were doing things with the best of intentions that looked like good management, but were having a diminishing effect. And the name I gave to that was the accidental diminisher. And, there's a number of ways we see this. And there's 9 that I see a lot. The fountain of ideas, who's creative and innovative, and like, they don't think their ideas are better. They're just tossing out ideas, trying to get other people, to brainstorm and ideate. But people tend to hold back around these leaders, like, well, you know what, I'll just take one of these ideas and go with it, rather than like dig deep. And, rescuing leaders who want people to be successful when people are struggling, they jump in and they help. Maybe unwilling to like do what my dad did that time, which is like, well, you're on your own with this. Or they're leaders who are pace setting, who are like showing their team, like, this is what this new initiative looks like. I'm going to be more service oriented. I'm going to spend more time with the customers. And people end up watching them. They get out ahead of their team, but people aren't following them. They're just watching them do their thing. Or always on super energetic leaders who think they're like motivating and like, woo, bring in the energy. But everyone's like, no, this is draining, exhausting. Like, I'm trying to avoid you. Like, we hide from those leaders because they're so draining. And there's a myriad of ways that this happens. But I've spent the last decade trying to help leaders see into the gap between their best intentions as a leader and the impact it actually has on others. Like, you're killing people with your good intentions.
And you provide the tools, the tool sets, if you will, to be able to not only identify, right, because you've pointed out these 9 areas, but what to do with the information, right? How can I move beyond this? How can I become better? How can I be a better leader? And so
some really simple strategies.
So let's take one of these as an example, and I'll just pick the person who is overly energetic, let's say, because I know somebody like that. I'm looking in a mirror. So let's give a strategy or two, a simple strategy for that particular one. And obviously we're going to link to the book in the show notes so everybody can go and get all of the strategies. But let's talk about that one as an example.
I'm reaching for my poker chips. I keep a set of chips on my desk, and this is a great remedy for the always on leader, as well as like the fountain of ideas. But it's this poker chip strategy where, we tend to over contribute where we get excited. Like it's usually we end up diminishing when we are fired up about something, when, something is important, we get like all frothed up about it. And so it's this idea of, if you're going to go into a meeting where you're likely to over contribute, maybe it's where you're jazzed up about something. You take the poker chip challenge and you decide that, each chip represents something you're going to say or contribute into this meeting. And it's essentially giving yourself a budget. I like to think of chips because like when you contribute, it's like you're playing a chip into this. And, we find that the best leaders, they know when to play big and they play big, but they don't play big all the time. They also know when to play small and step back and let other people fill that space. And so it's a way of moderating and minimizing your footprint in a conversation when it's time for other people to maximize their footprint in the conversation. And, it's dispense your ideas in kind of small but intense doses.
I love that. And it's tangible, right? It's something that I can feel. So it's a constant reminder to me. I love that idea. That's a great one.
Some people take chips into meetings. I'm like, well, it's sort of metaphorical. It's meant to like keep in your, but some people are like, no, I carry them in my pocket to remind me.
That's perfect. So next meeting I go into, Jay, why do you have poker chips? Well, Liz suggested I bring these in. Perfect. So thank you for sharing that. And as I mentioned, we are going to link in the show notes to Multipliers. And I would highly encourage that our listeners not walk, but run to go purchase a copy of the book if you have not already done so. It's going to be a game changer for you. Let's dig into your latest book, Impact Players. Now, that book, by the time this episode is released, that book will have already come out. You studied 170 top contributors, and you uncovered the mindsets and the habits of those influential individuals. So tell us what you discovered during the research phase. And before you do that, though, why did you write the book now? What was speaking to you at the time that the idea came about, and why was this the right time?
Well, I think, over the last 10 years, as I've been helping leaders figure out what they need to do differently so that people can contribute more fully. Like that's essentially what I've been doing for the last decade. You get to the part in your teaching work and consulting work with people where you run out of answers. And this was the case. Like I'm at the edge of like the known universe because, there's a responsibility that leaders hold in creating an environment where people can do amazing work and contribute fully. But the leader's not the only variable in this equation. And this is best probably captured in a little moment I had. I was teaching a workshop. I think it was at Salesforce. And one of the, I think it was an engineering manager, we're doing the whole multipliers conversation. We're talking about all these different ideas and strategies. And he's like, yeah, I want to be a multiplier, but you can't multiply zero. I'm like, wow, what does that mean? And I'm assuming he's talking about like, well, I got a bunch of dummies on my team, or, these are like lazy or, lacking in some ways. And I'm thinking, what does that say about his assumptions about the people on his team? And then he goes to clarify this. And I get what he's talking about. What he's saying is like, there are things I can do as a leader, but I also need people on my team to show up in a certain way. Like I need to bring the right mindsets and practices, but they need to bring the right mindsets and practices as well. Like, yeah, like there is an obligation and an opportunity. Like the way that we show up to work has a lot to do with how fully we can contribute our own intelligence. And in some ways, it's also not waiting for leaders to get it right. It would be kind of like, and this is where it goes back to my background, with my own family. Like if I had waited around for my dad to create this like kind of inviting, warm relationship, I never would have had an inviting, warm, like my father and I had an amazingly sweet and tender relationship. But, I had to initiate some of that. And I had to push back on him to get some of that. And I think it's the same in the workplace. Like we can come in as a recipient, like, okay, now is when you provide me good leadership and management, and then I will contribute. And then there's an orientation of, I don't need to wait for good leadership. I can take the lead. And in fact, the more self-managing people are, the more it allows their managers to get out of the business of managing, which for a lot of people ends up in micromanaging, which zero people like on the planet. And it allows leaders to lead. And so I was really looking at, like, what is it that people who make a big impact and do work that is really valuable and build this kind of influence, like, what are they doing? What's their part of the deal? And that's really what this is about. And why I went to do it, because I'm like, well, there's more to it than just the behavior of the leaders.
So what was the research process like? Over what time frame did this occur, where you spoke to these, or at least aggregated 170 different pieces of research?
So we went to, I'm trying to even remember the year. I think it was 2019. I'm terrible with years. I have a hard time like remembering what years things happen. I tell you, it was in the summer. And what we did is we went to 9 organizations to be our research partners. And they were all like chosen for being great employers, like places people would want to work. So like Google and LinkedIn and Adobe and Salesforce, in the tech sector, and a few others, Stanford Health in the healthcare sector, and Target in retail, and then NASA in government agency. NASA's consistently the best place to work. I mean, they're rocket scientists, so like they have fun jobs, but it's a really good employer in the federal government. And we went into each one of them and asked to interview about 25 managers. And we asked each of these managers to identify people that had worked for them over the years in a number of settings who fell into like 3 categories. One was someone who was delivering work of extreme value and making a big impact. Those are people I called impact players. The other was people who are making a solid contribution, not average performers, but people who are like doing great work. Someone you wouldn't mind having 10 of these folks on your team. And then the third category was, for me, the most interesting, which is a category I ended up labeling under contributors. It wasn't low performers, it's people who are under contributing relative to their capability. And here's the thing that was so, for me, fun about this research is we asked managers, we made a real point of this. Every person you give us in these 3 categories should be someone who is smart, capable, and hardworking. So we're not looking for like, oh, this person is like clueless. No, these are all people who are bringing capability and who are working hard. And we want to know, why do some people end up going through the motions and just doing their job while other people end up doing work of extreme impact and value? Like, what's the differentiator? So it's not like, well, this person's just smart. Well, no. We want everyone, kind of equally capable. And so what we found, and there's lots more to the research process about how I synthesized all that data and pulled out all the themes and patterns. And I was assuming no one really wants to nerd out with me on how that was done, but more like, well, what did we find? And, what we found is that the differentiators, they aren't necessarily like moments of crisis where these impact players differentiate themselves. They're what I ended up calling everyday challenges. So there were 5 situations in particular where impact players approach their work very differently than typical contributors. And the kind of the names I put on these were messy problems, unclear roles, unforeseen or even unreasonable obstacles, moving targets, and unrelenting demands. And as I looked at these situations that the impact players handle so differently than other people, I'm like, oh, yeah, these are the challenges that you face, whether you work in tech or the financial industry or hospitality, or if you work as a principal of a school or a K through 12 teacher, like these are the challenges you face everywhere because they're the byproduct of uncertainty and ambiguity. And we found that, like at the most fundamental level, the impact players look at these situations fraught with ambiguity, and instead of seeing them as a threat, like, oh, the roles are unclear here, I don't know who's in charge, they see that as an opportunity. Oh, well, we've kind of got a leaderless collaboration going. I don't know who's in charge of this meeting or this project. Like, maybe I could provide value by stepping up and leading. So whereas other people are like waiting for direction, like, okay, I need someone to clarify, like, could you all tell us like who's the boss here? They just step into that void and they take the lead. And that's not surprising for people who have impact, but we find they don't just step up and lead, they as willingly step back and follow.
Interesting.
The image I get is the flock of migrating geese that fly in that V formation, which is one bird is out there in front saying, okay, I'm going to like break the wind and I'm going to create this draft that allows us to fly really efficiently. Scientists say that it's like 71% more efficient than solo flight. It allows a flock to fly through more difficult conditions and further. But that same bird doesn't always lead. Like they would exhaust themselves. If they did, they lead and then they fall back and they draft off the bird in front. And it's this rotating form of leadership. And it's the kind of leadership most organizations need right now, which is not steep management hierarchies and rigidity, but like people are saying, okay, yeah, I'll take the lead on that. And I'll assemble a team of my peers and maybe even like superiors in the organization, and I'll lead that initiative. But I'm equally comfortable being on a project where I'm following the lead of one of my peers or someone who works for me on my team, like that we can step in and out of leadership roles. Actually creates agility, but it also builds leadership strength in lots of places. And it builds our personal credibility. Because as much as we like people who are willing to take the lead, we kind of resent people who are always needing to be the boss. Sure. Just like the parent who has to volunteer for all the big PTA responsibilities. You're like, so where's that going? Like, I have a feeling I know where that's going. Like, this is going to go for like your child gets preferential treatment, right? Like that's how those things tend to end up. And so like, I love it when someone says, I'll be PTA president, but I'm also willing to serve on another committee and let somebody else take the lead another time.
Powerful. Well, I am so very much looking forward to this book coming out. As I mentioned, by the time this episode airs, the book will already be out. So we are going to link to impact players as well in the show notes. And please make a point to go out and purchase a copy as well and learn from it and apply the lessons that you learn. That's the most important part of it. Educating yourself is one thing, applying is another. So, Liz, before I ask my final question to you, there are so many different areas I would love to go into with you, but I want to be respectful of your time. What challenge would you like to give to our listeners?
Can I have two?
Or do sure, you can. No, you are welcome to give two. Always giving more.
You know, if it's one of my accidental diminisher tendencies, as might be obvious. You know, towards the end of the book, I'm like, you know what? There's really across all of it. It's like you could ignore all of it in some ways. Like there's two master skills that I really see at the heart of having impact and being an impact player in our organization. And they're both how we see things. And the first is the art of perspective taking, like seeing things through other people's perspective. Like strangely, the people who have the biggest impact are not the people driving a personal agenda. They're the people who can see what's important to their leaders, to their clients, to their stakeholders, and then they make that important to them. They can see like what problems look like through other people's lens. So, if you're going to go out and do something with this, like just start asking yourself the question, well, what does it look like from somebody else's point of view? And I think our whole society needs a big dose of this. Like I'm trying to constantly say okay, every time I get agitated and opinionated, what does this look like for someone else who's maybe in a very different situation than me? And so practice the art of perspective taking. What does this look like for someone else? The second is this art of seeing opportunity where we might initially see threat. And it's looking at problems and everyday challenges through an opportunity lens of, okay, now I see how this could be scary, but how might this leadership vacuum or this messy problem, how might this actually be an opportunity to create value, both for the organization and for me? And as we move toward this kind of these everyday messy challenges, we end up creating impact. So those would be the two things that I think would lead to the biggest impact for people.
Perfect. Wonderful, wonderful challenges. As you were articulating the first challenge, I was getting chills because I was thinking about, and I've brought this up before on the podcast, but I was thinking about this little note, Liz, that I keep with me at all times. It's sitting in my car right now, and I refer to it regularly. It's kind of like the chips example. Mm-hmm. And all the piece of paper says is, let me see this in a different way, or let me see this differently. And all it really does, it's just a reminder to me to give some pause, to try to look at things from a different perspective, try to look at things through the eyes of the other person. And it could be anything, whether it's business or personal, but thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate those two challenges.
Well, Jay, in some ways, I want to withdraw my two challenges and offer yours as a better solution. That in some ways, what really underlies those two things is this ability to pause and have a second look. Like, okay, here's what I see, but what does somebody else see? Or I see threat, and can I just pause long enough to see the opportunity? It's like slowing down our thinking. And can I see this in a different way? Yeah, so I love your challenge.
Thank you. So here is my final question to you. What are you adding or eliminating from your life right now to live more fulfilled and with greater purpose?
Oh, really? Okay, that's a hard one for me right now because I feel so busy right now. And I am very mindful that I can't stay this busy. So I'm trying to figure out how to be less busy, which is hard for someone who has the nickname Busy Lizzie. People who work for me, have called me Busy Lizzie, and I do busy well, but I know it doesn't lead to being well. And so I'm trying to be less busy.
Okay. So does that mean that you're learning to say no to more things, delegating more? How are you working through that?
Yeah, I think the first approach is delegate more, but there's a limit to that. So it's like the art of saying no is something I've been doing my whole life, trying to be a working mom. I have 4 children and a rich family life, and not a rich family, but a rich family life. And that's been very important to me. And so I've always had to do this, but I'm now having to do it at a level that doesn't feel very good. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that's my challenge right now.
Okay.
Saying no when I really want to say yes.
Fair enough. Well, I am very, very appreciative of you saying yes to our time together. That's been incredibly meaningful. I appreciate you sharing your story, going deep on some areas, sharing your experience and your knowledge with our listeners. And just know that I'm grateful for you and thank you.
Oh, well, thanks for your time and thanks for your question and thanks for digging into some of the ideas. It means a lot to me.
Certainly. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and listening. And please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and would you leave us a review? We would greatly appreciate that. Let us know what you thought about this episode. And to enjoy more episodes and to learn how J. Shear Business Consulting can help build a solid foundation for your service-based business, all you have to do is visit jshearbusinessconsulting.com. And until next time, keep learning and growing and pick up a copy of Impact Players. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care.
J Shear
J. Shear
Business Consultant.
J. Shear Business Consulting.